welcome to Power Ballads, inspiring stories one note at a time. I'm your host, Missy Krause Taylor, and today I'm very excited to introduce our guest, the one, the only, Micah Krause. I should say Micah Jude Krause, just so that you don't get potentially confused by anyone else or anyone else, but I don't think that's actually possible. Micah is an artist, an owner of Work Studio Limited, and is here today to talk about his superpowers and the great work that he has done. Now, before I go into just sort of getting to know you, Micah, and having you share with us a little bit about yourself, I need to start with playing a snippet of your power song, one of your power songs. So let's see. You'll be able to recognize this, I'm sure. We'll see if our listeners.
Long time ago they were pirates, beating waves from the sea. But now all the stations are silent, 'cause they ain't got government license. Wanna tell your problems, voting from your basic room, having trouble with your partner, letters on in a good mood. If you wanna hear a record, get the word from
So, Micah, I'm going to take a little bit of credit for this being one of your power songs, given that I believe it was me that introduced you to The Clash all of those years ago.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Yep.
but hey, tell us who you are and why in the world I would be talking to you
I
about
know.
The Clash. And
Why would you waste the
might
time?
listen to me. Why would you listen to me?
Well, yeah. Both of my power ballad songs. That was the first cassette tape that I ever bought was Black Market Clash, and I remember I had like whatever $7, and we were going to go to the mall. I think I was going with Mike Dell, and I had asked you like what music I should buy because I was also really into Huey Lewis and the News at the time.
Yeah,
And,
I can't.
You're not going to take credit for that.
Not going to take credit for all of the music, that I exposed you to. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, you steered me straight on that, and that is an album that was probably 1988 or 89 when you recommended that. So it's been a long time of listening to that band. So yeah, thank you for that.
Of course. Well, if our listeners haven't guessed, there may be somewhat of a familial connection between us. So Micah is my little brother, but
Yes.
I got to tell you, you inspire me, and I often look to you more as a big brother. At least now that we're out of the house and I'm
Right.
not tormenting you like I used to, because you're bigger than me.
Vice versa too. I don't get to torment you in the same way anymore either, and I feel the
Yeah.
same way. I have always looked to you. You're a trailblazer, and I have gladly walked down that clear path that you've created to be able to pursue the things that I'm interested in and excited about. And as the older sibling, you did such a fantastic job of like finding a way and creating a way. And that's always been really, really helpful and meaningful to me.
Thank you. I think, though, you probably mean that I beat down the path for our parents. Like I just
Yeah.
beat them down, and it's like we can't even. Okay, she tired us out. So you go ahead, Micah.
That's
Same thing
it.
probably for teachers too. They're like, look,
Yeah.
another Krause coming through. I'm not sure.
No, I think on that end, I was very thankful there was 6 years between us because there's a long enough time for them to forget what a stellar student you were, or at least disassociate that with me. And so I didn't have to try to compete with that. They were like, oh, this kid's the remnants. He'll just make his way. Just let him through.
Oh man. Well, tell us what you're up to now, Micah. Where are you living? What are you doing for a living?
Yeah.
Who's in your family? Give us the deets.
Yeah. So I am married to the lovely artist Kim Eggleston Krause. We've been married for 22 years now and living in Akron, Ohio, where I first began my career as an educator at Hoban High School back in 2001 and worked there for years and years. And then a couple of years ago, I made the transition into part-time at the high school as my art business and design business grew to a point that it became too challenging to balance both of those things and do the quality of work that I knew was necessary in the classroom, and at the same time to be able to be fulfilled by the artistic practice. And so that was a challenge to make that determination. Wasn't really, I kind of assumed if I ever got to that point, it would be a fear thing of like, man, will I be able, will this sustain itself? Am I just going to end up destitute and without a job and all the work will dry up? And really it was much more of a challenge of leaving a teaching field that really meant a lot to me. And, but at the same time, it was very clear at the time that it was necessary, kind of a now or never situation. So taught part-time for a couple of years and was able to spend more time in the studio and take on more of a workload. And then about this time last year, I had an oh crap moment, realizing that the workloads in the studio had grown to a point that it was going to be a very challenging school year and in order of finding enough time. So started having that internal dialogue of like, okay, what are the next steps? Are you really going to step away from teaching? And that again was challenging, but came to terms with it that again, it was like, hey, listen, that was a great career. You did that. It wasn't a flash in the pan. You committed to it. It's time for the next phase. And while you're young enough to enjoy it and really lean hard into it, you better do this. It's a special opportunity. So this year I started working full-time as an artist and really never thought that would happen. Didn't really even have an expectation of that. Knew it would be a part of my life, my whole life, but never realized that it would be the breadwinner. And it's been kind of amazing. So that's these past couple months have been a lot of pinch myself moments of like, oh my gosh, this is happening. Yeah. It's been pretty neat.
I love it. I love it. And I just, I've watched you sort of going through this, but hearing you outline all of that, I'm struck again by how our paths have, there may be 6 years that separate us in age, but our career paths have actually been on a remarkably similar timeline. Yeah. And, it was, so you were at Hoban for 22 years, 22 years. I was at my previous job, Porter Novelli, for 24 years. So yeah, there's something to us and loyalty and long-term commitments. And I remember distinctly calling you about this time last year saying, do I make that transition? And knowing that you had been in the process of that. And you really helped me and inspired me to the point where I couldn't think of anything else. I just, and so as you're talking about like hitting that point of you recognize like, now is the time. And I just have always believed that if you're running towards something versus running from something, right, there's a good indication, right, that that's a good path to be on. Yeah. That there is, that yes, other things may have found kind of their time, but it's not I got to leave this. Right. But instead it's, I just need to run towards the stream.
That's it. Exactly. Sorry to interject here, but that's exactly it. One of the struggles I found in leaving the classroom was I think there was an assumption from my colleagues, Stephen, even though they'd known me for a long time and knew that I wasn't a negative person, I didn't dislike my job. There was this assumption that I was moving on to something better, that I had I'd found the better thing to step into, or I don't know, even that it was like an upgrade. And listen, it is a unique situation. I get it. Like it's not common for people to leave a full-time job that is fulfilling and pays what it needs to, and all of those things. I was respected in that role. So it's I think that's what I'm getting to, is it's confusing to people to do that. And you may have experienced that as well. But I kept having to say, like, no, guys, it's not like I'm shedding the cloak of Hoban so that I can be this free bird.
Right.
They're on an equal plane to me, but I am an artist. I became a teacher, and I found that I retrofitted a lot of who I am. I had a lot of natural things from the way that we were both brought up in the world that we grew up in. Being an educator was not a big adjustment. There's a very natural fit. But in terms of the way my brain functions and I operate, I am an artist, and that's become more and more clear. And to fit that into the classroom was challenging and a little constraining. But to think of it as like a lesser than role, or like a thing that I had always endeavored to move on beyond, I think that devalues the teaching role and how much I was dedicated to it or cared about it. So I never wanted to put on those kinds of airs. It was really just like you said. I guess what brought all that to mind was this idea of running towards something, trusting your instinct, and leaving a position at a time where it was still very positive and it was still very, you were very gratified to have been a part of it, and to step into the next.
Absolutely.
And you got to feel fortunate to have that situation.
So true. And I think a number of people have had that sort of realization and that opportunity over the past few years, particularly because of the just shake up with the pandemic and just realizing, what am I waiting for in many ways. But I think too that it is hard when people that you've worked alongside for so long, and if you see them go or they're seeing you go, you can't help but start to kind of question, like, well, what's wrong? What's wrong with this place? What's wrong with me? And it doesn't have to be that something was wrong.
No.
It's just a evolution and a leaning in to what's next.
That's right.
So
I guess one more thing I'll say about that, in the commitment side of things, you use that word, or loyalty. I read something fairly recently that was, it was like a measurement of what kind of procrastinator you are. And certainly in much of my life, I've been a procrastinator in many things, but in my adult life, it was something I really fought, like, stop delaying these things. Are you there still?
I am. It glitched a little,
lagged.
but
Okay, cool.
yep.
So that's something I worked against, and I thought, like, well, I'm not a procrastinator. That's not something I do. And then I took this measurement. It was really interesting to see how it defined procrastination and kind of laid it out. And what I discovered is I am a procrastinator on big life decisions. And I've known I think the first time I brought up to Kim that I was really thinking about moving into a full art role was probably 5 years into my teaching career. And it was a particularly tough time at the job, and I was really starting to weigh some things, but it wasn't the right time. That was not really where my heart was. And so it just took years and years, and I kept seeing these milestones of like projects that needed to be completed, or things that I really wanted to accomplish in the job, kids that I wanted to see go through their high school journey. And finally, about a year ago, it was like, okay, that's done. I've procrastinated, maybe not in the negative sense of the word, but it took that time to now feel comfortable to make this move without regret.
Yeah.
So it's funny how that does take it takes time.
It takes some time, but I think I would also call that wisdom and perspective too. You know, I mean, I'm struck by the fact that probably at Porto Novelli 4-5 years, maybe. And our general manager at the time had given us a Christmas gift of this Japanese doll, and you color in one eye and you make a wish for the future. And when that wish is fulfilled, or that, aspiration is fulfilled, then you draw in the second eye. And I remember at that time, my wish was to go out on my own. And it wasn't a, oh, I want to get out of here, but it was just like I always had this sort of aspiration of building and creating something. But that was meant, I mean, it was not, I just knew that was an aspiration, but it was not even feasible,
Right.
At all.
Yep.
I couldn't even imagine how that would happen. And time goes on, and you learn all these different, get all these different experiences and meet different people and are inspired, and you grow. And then one day you revisit that dream and you say, that is possible.
Yeah.
That really is possible.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Pretty
amazing.
Pretty amazing. And I think the other thing I heard in what you were just sharing is that longevity and the longevity in your career does not mean a static kind of career. There was
Right.
always growing and changing, right? Whether it was, like you said, you oversaw huge projects, you advanced in your career, you changed the landscape of arts education at Hoban, as well as being able to journey alongside students, through their high school career. So that's pretty awesome
It was special.
as well.
Yeah. Thanks.
So,
Yep.
yeah.
Absolutely.
But then there's a time where it feels maybe, I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I know I've felt this way, that I've given a lot to others. It's really amazing to be able to put energy into building something that's mine.
Absolutely.
That still, I want to benefit other people and I get joy out of that. But the effort is going into not several layers of bureaucracy, but directly to me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's, I guess that kind of plays into as you were prepping me for some thoughts here of like what a superpower is. It's like, I have no idea. But I think that's what I put my finger on was opportunity. And that's, I see, I can identify opportunities and get really excited about them. And to put it in one way, it feels mischievous, and that gets me tingly. I get excited about that when I feel like I'm getting away with something. And most of the time that's a good thing, but it can definitely range towards the bad. But I always felt that way at the school when I saw an opportunity that, we could do something that has multiple benefits here. It's, it's going to touch a lot of things that we need to have happen. It's going to be fun along the way, and it's going to result in some great opportunities for the kids. And I think that's one reason that I was able to stick to producing art through the job as well, was every time I would land a gallery show or pick up a client job, it really felt a little just mischievous is really the only word I can get. Like I was tricking the system or something, like, yes, I'm doing it. A negative maybe term that can be put to it was a little spiteful, because through college, a lot of my studio professors were just very down on art education and thought it was a waste of time to pursue that career. If you're going to be an artist, don't hedge your bets here. And so I felt a little pulled between those worlds. And during my senior year of college, one of my professors shared this statistic. I think he was trying to rile us up a little bit and get us focused, but he had read that 10% of graduates with a BFA continue to make art for 10 years after they graduate. And 10% of that 10% continues after that point of time. So it's this like minuscule group of people that continue to make art. And that stuck in my head, and it was definitely a chip of just like, okay, you set the mark for me, then I'm going to keep doing this. And I wouldn't think about that all the time, but it would pop into my head of like, oh, it's been like 8 years and I'm still showing work. Okay, I'm not going to give up on this thing. This is part of who I am. And so those opportunities get me really excited. It's kind of a bubble inside that it's almost a euphoric feeling when you're on the cusp of an idea, when you're on the very start of a pursuit of a concept, or maybe it's a proposal for a grant, when you're just starting to chew on, a branding project that's come across the desk. And it's kind of ebbs between terror and dread of like, I'm never going to find the solution for this thing. I have no idea how to approach this. And then pieces start to come together a little bit. And that bubble starts to form where, I start to feel like it's trying to get out of me. And that gets really exciting. Whereas I know like it's funny, personalities and how relationships work. For Kim, she's a person that might see, a proposal or an opportunity, and her interpretation of that is much more practical. Mm-hmm. And so instead of immediately starting to dream and imagine and also negotiate with the idea of there's a 90% chance this isn't going to happen, but if it does, it's going to be amazing. And along the way, I'm going to learn a lot, and maybe it'll lead me down a different path. Even if this one doesn't work, the work that I'm going to do towards that idea could lead me in some really interesting directions. So I'm just going to pursue it. And I've benefited from Kim's practicality in, mm-hmm. being the kind of the ribbon on the balloon to hold you tethered to something, so you don't just float away. But I also think I've recognized how thankful I am to be able to dream and just be frivolous at times with energy towards something that very likely won't happen, but to still pursue it, that gets me excited.
I love that opportunity. Powerful, powerful superpower. I also hear things like, I hear a little bit of rebel, so when I think about classic story archetypes, I'm like, you tell me I can't do it. Oh, I will show you that, that a way can be made. And I was thinking about just sort of hustle too. There's a certain, again, that kind of fits this whole sort of, or, kind of the scrappy approach of like, I'm going to make this happen. It can happen.
Yeah.
You have what seems like a boundless amount of energy. And I've always admired that in you. If you've ever felt like a procrastinator sometime, I feel like, I feel lazy in comparison to you, but, I love that notion of opportunity, as your superpower.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, it's funny. The rebel thing, when I was looking at story archetypes, trying to think through those, I'm only a rebel within very defined contexts. Mm-hmm. And that's the trailblazer idea. I'm not going to be a person that goes and blazes a path, but I will gladly be the second or third person to go down that trail and say like, I see where that's going, but if we turn left here, maybe that'll lead us in a different direction, or it definitely will, but maybe it'll discover something new that way. So, I know there's like classic stories of people at a concert, the first person to get up and dance, mm-hmm. That's never going to be me, but I probably won't be the second or third either. But once there's a small critical mass, I'm happy to join the fray. and then maybe goof off a little bit and like spice it up in my own way. But I'm not going to be the first, probably not the second or the third. And that actually goes into my artistic practice as well. I rely a lot on reference of past imagery. It's one of the first things I do on a project is just start visually researching images and collecting those things. Sometimes I'll draw directly from them, even trace them, because I love the idea of working from something that is already finished and then being able to make my decisions on top of that. In kind of like a jazz improv way, but like Warhol and Jasper Johns. And, you know, one thing that Jasper Johns did was he had this American flag series that he painted. And when asked why the flag, he was like, well, it's already a thing that's known. I don't have to worry about meaning. I don't have to make decisions about composition. I'm going to work within that context and make marks and use a process. And I love that idea because it does have meaning. You know, it's naturally going to have meaning. It's always going to refer back to this very loaded symbol. And so that influenced me as a young artist to think like, yeah, okay, how can you take something that exists and let that be your foundation? And now you're not worried about drawing skill or, you know, all the things that can freeze you up really easily in a creative way. All those decisions are made. Now you just apply your mark making and let it be, you decide what stays, what goes, and so on and so forth. So I love that idea. So with the rebel thing, I have to have a really distinct boundary to work within.
Yeah.
As I kind of just freeze up a little bit.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, there are pieces of a lot of different archetypes too. Now, the more that you spoke, you know, I was thinking about the adventurer, just as you're willing to say, oh, why don't we play with and explore if we went this way, you know?
Yeah.
And then one that's probably the most obvious one, but of course I didn't say that one first, is creator.
Yeah.
But it's with all of those with your unique twist and spin on it. I remember talking to an artist a number of years ago who introduced me to this book and this concept of a beautiful constraint. And the idea was that real creativity can come within these constraints.
Yes.
And a completely wide open field can actually be, it can just overwhelm.
Yep.
But when you are given, okay, you're going to work within this and now make it into something new and fresh and that speaks, you know, from your heart and represents you, that's when you can really let the creativity flow.
I totally agree. Yep, I totally agree. And I think in design projects, for instance, it's really like the third, fourth, maybe fifth round of revision is where the real creativity begins, because you've exhausted all ideas at that point, and now you're really dialing things in. You're getting into the minutia and trying to solve a problem that you thought you had solved maybe like 3 times ago. And so that's, I think, where the creative muscle endurance kicks in, is like, okay, all right, we're going to continue this process and we're going to dig deep into the reserves and see what's possible. Yeah, it's funny. The archetype that I think I identified with most was the quest.
They should have just let you speak
No,
early
no.
on.
No.
So yeah,
But
I like that, the quest. Yeah.
The quest, because I think that's what I felt like my whole teaching career was a quest. And in all jobs, there's no destination, there's no finish line that's defined. And it's one thing that I realized at the end of teaching was the question that came to mind was, to what end? To what end will you do this? Is it because you think there's a ticker tape at the end to celebrate a retirement? Like, what does all that mean? Will it be the last student that you know, that's the last person I need to teach? None of that makes sense. And so the quest is this accumulation of experiences along the way. And it's never about the end destination. Certainly with art, it's the same. That bubble of opportunity and idea generation, to me, is the most satisfying part of the art making experience. And I love the process of making art, but in a lot of times that becomes a formulaic thing. That's okay, this has to happen now, this, now this, now this. And that's satisfying in its own way, but it's not the same as that churn of creativity to generate the momentum. And then once the piece is done, it's not really interesting anymore. It's like,
Yeah.
move it along and get to the
Yeah.
next thing. I think that's where the quest comes into play, of this notion of pursuit and trying to stay present enough along that pursuit to observe what's happening, which is its own challenge. But yeah, I don't know. What's your experience with, since we're, people coming from the same backgrounds, and busy-minded people that like to be involved in a lot of things. Do you have a struggle with staying present in something without already looking towards the next or thinking about what's ahead?
Yeah, at times. I mean, I think that, it's interesting. I don't like to think too far ahead. I think maybe I've really taken to, like, today has enough troubles of its own. I don't want to be unprepared, but
Yeah.
I don't, gosh, even if, as I try to put together 1 year plans, like a lot of like learning and development plans, I'm bored with the idea by the midpoint of the year. And I think, oh, we're going to do that same thing for, the whole year. So
Yeah.
it's, and I think that once I've got the idea and I'm excited about it, I just want to be full in on that. But I also know that once I've built it and delivered it, I'm going to want to move on to the next thing. And either that will need to be like, let me reinvent the thing that I've done, or let me just start something different. I'm very much, a builder. I'm not a maintainer.
Right.
And one of the things I've appreciated about learning about strengths and superpowers is understanding that you don't have strengths across everything. Acknowledging what you're really strong at, what really powers you, is also acknowledging what either deflates you or you don't have any business doing. And part of that's hard to acknowledge. Like, part of me wants to fight against that, because what do you mean I can't do that?
Right.
The other part is very freeing, because when I think, right, I am not good with like consistency and doing the same thing the same way over and over again. I am grateful other people are, because we need that. That is not me. And when I found myself in roles or doing things like that, I mean, that's when I'm going to procrastinate. That's when I'm going to try to find something else to do, because that is death. So yeah, I think what I've seen in myself is that I've got this combination of liking to build and activate things and having a lot of energy for that, but also having this drive to get things done, to have some sense of like accomplishment. And so I would not be good with things either that just kind of, a quest that never ends.
Sure.
Yep. I can enjoy some things along the path, but I do need some sort of destination to get to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's a superpower, recognizing the need for other people to take on roles or to know areas that metacognitive and meta-behavioral knowledge of where you're strong and where you need assistance or support.
Yeah. It's, something I wish I'd well, you could always wish that you get to things earlier. It definitely has taken time and
Yeah.
age
Yep.
and maturity, right? To say, I don't
Yeah.
have to be good at everything.
That's right.
And it takes, I think, a lot of security,
Yeah.
like feeling confident in what you are good at to say, I'm going to create space so that we can all work together.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm saying that still is my ultimate aspiration. I have to say, I am one of the worst at not staying in my lane. Like, I got a lane, I got a job, but that's where I'm not always present, right?
Right.
I'm like, oh, but I could help over there, and oh, let me jump in over there. So
Yeah.
that can be a little bit challenging.
I
but-
understand. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious, who or what inspires you as you, from a creative standpoint, from kind of this, like what keeps you on that quest,
Mm.
and also just thinking about, the world today. It does have its struggles and things that can kind of take us out of our best selves or best place. Is there something you've been reading, watching, or listening to lately that inspires you?
Yeah. I think in a more ethereal way, I'm inspired by need. When I see a need that, when I'm, how do I put it? When there's a need that I know I can fulfill,
Mm-hmm.
I'm very motivated to pursue that. And to quote my good friend Greg Milo, where I suck is where I love myself the most. I think his phrase, if I said it correctly. And basically that means that I can overcommit really easily because I do love to satisfy people's needs. And so where I love that feeling of being able to step in and feel highly capable in that way, I suck because I can say yes too many times and then not fulfill any of the needs, and end up having to back out and be like, I'm panicking because I said yes too much. But I do get inspired by that. And that goes back to the opportunity thing, is seeing that potential to lean into something. But in terms of reading and listening, I listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks. And so spend a lot of time in the studio with the opportunity to have things playing out loud. And then on the bicycle, I find that is a great way to listen to things where I'm not good at being idle and reading. That's like a sleeping pill for me, unfortunately. As much as I love it when I can do it, it just is not something I'm good at. So I've been listening to a lot, and storytelling is something that I really am moved by. And so podcasts like The Moth or Snap Judgment are two that there's been many days in the studio that I'm just like drawing, working on a project, and I'm just like, my eyes are blurring out because I'm tearing up because of some story on The Moth or whatever.
Yes.
And it doesn't obviously have to be a sad story. It's just that moving experience of hearing someone else share their vulnerability or their experience. As a late adopter to a lot of things, I just listened to Roots, Alex Haley's Roots, which was like a 30-hour audiobook. So I lived in that world for a period of time.
Wow.
Listening to it. And typically I'll put things on like 1.25 speed, but this is one where I was like, okay, this is not a rush experience. You need to really hear this. First of all, what an incredible storyteller. And the structure and arc of the story, the way it was told, was so consuming. Obviously extremely heavy and troubling content in the story. But one that's something that I've found over the past, 8 years, 7 years, is a challenge to know more of what I believe. And to have, I don't know, to reinforce and buttress the things that I instinctively know are right by actually learning about them. And I don't think I would have been challenged to do that without the turmoil that our country has been in for the past 7 or 8 years specifically. And so in some ways that's been a benefit, is to make me face myself and be like, yeah, okay, what do you believe and do you know anything about this? You know, have you taken the time to actually learn? So listening to Roots was one thing that I felt challenged to do, and it sent me down a path of just wanting to know more, you know, and wanting to know more about the people I live with and the history of our country. So that's been pretty amazing. This author, Naomi Klein, is also someone that I've been reading, and she's a Canadian author that I had heard on another podcast that I listened to, and she's a economist that definitely has a anti-free market, anti-capitalist approach, but which is not my leaning. But one thing I really like about her approach is that she has this way of researching and telling her story, telling her information in parallel with something else. And so her book, Shock Doctrine, was telling about how the shock and awe military approach that the United States has been used in economic approaches as well in the past, and kind of walks through the history of those encounters. So I like to be challenged by that because I'm not drinking all the medicine on it, but there's a lot there to learn from, you know, and to kind of measure yourself against. But the problem with audiobooks and all of it is that it doesn't sit long in my brain. It's not absorbed. And so I'll have like these pieces and parts of things that I remember, and then it filters away.
Well, that's why I'm thankful for this that can quickly look up, because well, you're just going to extend my reading list now. You know, I do like the sedentary reading, and I love to just devour books, and I'll have, you know, I can feel my brain, you know, the synapses, but it also doesn't necessarily stick. And so I have to, it's interesting, the last couple of months, I've actually sort of started to try to write things down, you know, and so that I can synthesize some more.
Yeah.
Because what I'll find is I will start to kind of go down this path of, maybe I'm listening to like, you know, and reading 3, 4, 5 different things, but there's some sort of theme to it. And I have to kind of force myself to say, okay, what am I seeing and what am I hearing? I could do a little bit better with that. Yeah. When you brought up Roots, man, I remember that being shown on TV. That's how old I am. And I wonder if that's what set me, because I think that was in like 77. And it was,
seems right.
And I remember when I was 8, 9, 10, I was obsessed with reading about slavery and the African American experience. And I don't know if there was some like residual of that, but anyway.
Yeah.
Interesting. That would be great to go back and read that.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, you have given me so much of your time, and I seriously could spend another couple of hours with you. As we wrap up, is there anything in particular that gives you hope for the future as you look ahead?
Yeah, that's something that I struggle with a little bit, not because I don't believe in hope, but I think because I tend to be a little too optimistic at times, and just believe things will work themselves out. And we're, I think, living in a time right now where that certainty is not quite there, you know, in
Yeah.
terms of the planet's trajectory and just a lot of ongoing turmoil that's been going on all over the world for a long time. But I think where I find hope is to go back to opportunity, that idea
Mhm.
of revision. So I'll just anchor it again in the design process. It's rooted in this idea of revision, and it's a reason that I'm thankful as an artist to be able to overlap my skill set in design as well. Because to continue this thread of thought, when I make things for a gallery exhibition, it is purely from me pouring
Mhm.
forward. And I'll do my own revision of thought throughout the way, but it's really a pouring out of a pure thing. Whereas it's a much different, the center of attention is so different in a design relationship. And the notion, the knowledge is from the start, I'm going to present things that articulate the idea well enough that the client can get the gist, but with the knowledge that this isn't the end, that I'm going to show it to you and I'm looking for your feedback here so that we can narrow it from 20 ideas to 5. And we can take those 5 and push it forward, and then down to 3, and then 2, and nail it. So you're charting that course. And in the best examples of that, in the best cases, the end result could have never been reached without that relationship.
Yeah.
And without all of that work and those conversations. And I think that can be extremely frustrating for some people that don't work well in that environment,
Mhm.
because it's a job that needs to be done. Why are we taking all this time to nitpick and be so tedious? But in the, again, best cases of that situation, without that process, you could never get to that end result. And it's amazing to open round 1's folder and round 10 and compare those things and be like, these aren't in the same universe. You know, it doesn't always end up well, but a lot of times it does. So that's my hope. I think in the most hopeful parts of my brain and my heart, I think that relationally as people
Mhm.
in various levels of structure, we can keep working through that process. And maybe we're in a struggle time right now. Maybe we're in that dread moment of the creative process where it's like, I don't see any way out. I'm not sure how this is all going to happen. But the bubble of opportunity is still to come. The inspiration moment is still to come. I think in my most hopeful places, that's what I believe. And that years from now, maybe long after I'm dead, when people look back, they're going to be like, how did we start there? And how did we end up here? This is incredible. There's a lot of the lens of viewing right now is that everything is a garbage pile, that it's all a big burning dumpster, and that we're on this like nosedive trajectory. And I think if that's the narrative, then that can be the reality, you know.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I think things have been hard forever. You know,
Yes.
it's never been
Yes.
perfect.
Yeah.
And in some ways we're doing better than in the past, and in other ways we've regressed. And we've believed that, you know, that you'll hear people say a lot of times, in 2023 we're still saying these things or believing these things. Like, listen, it's not a linear chronology. Ethics and morals and evolution of society doesn't work in a linear chronology. It doesn't matter that years accumulate. That doesn't mean you're better. There's work that has to happen there in order to get to that point. So maybe that's what we have to get through, is this pop of struggle to have some great discoveries that can make things better, make things more sustainable and beneficial. I hope.
Sounds to me, Micah, like a quest.
Like a quest. Yeah.
And that is where the hope is, that we can be on this quest.
Yeah.
Learning, revising, finding new ways. Yeah.
Yep.
Look at
Well
that.
said.
Yeah.
Full circle.
You said it. You said it. You are. Well, thank you so much. Hey, listen, let's close out with your other power song.
Cool.
And we'll play a snippet of this.
Which, and I'll say this as you're queuing it up, you inspired The Clash. Your lovely husband introduced the album that this song comes from to me. And I'm so blessed to have such wonderful, inspiring people in my life.
Awesome. Yes. When I saw this one up work, I'm like, heard that many, many, many times. But so fitting too. Homage to Andy Warhol and someone who really changed the world in terms of art and quest.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Power.
Good. Power. Good. Power. Good.
Power. Good. Power.
Good. Good. Power. Good. Power. Good.
Power. Good. Power.
Good. Power. Good.